This is Everyday Discipleship, a podcast whose mission is to equip Christians to live for the glory of Christ from a biblical worldview. My name is Chad Lee, and with me is Cole Chenal, and we are two pastors at Reformation Baptist Church in Northwest Arkansas, and today we're going to be discussing the rapture. So, a natural question for you, Cole, is what is the rapture?
So the rapture, I think most people know what it is, at least implicitly, because the rapture is the idea that there is some kind of secret, basically think Left Behind. There's some kind of secret coming of Christ where right before so this is a very dispensational view, right before the 7-year tribulation where the Antichrist reigns.
The in the air quotes.
The in air quotes. Even though John says it's the last hour, many Antichrists have come, so you do with that what you will. The only guy that mentioned Antichrist in the whole Bible, yet doesn't mention the Antichrist at all in Revelation, even though people say the Antichrist is all about, Revelation is all about it. There's a lot of stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
If you can tell I'm not
Yeah.
favorable to the rapture.
Yeah.
But the rapture is basically the idea of a secret coming of Christ where the church is what's called raptured out of the world, that they essentially, all Christians, all those who believe in Jesus will disappear from the world to avoid the tribulation, the 7 years of great trouble and hardship in the world under the reign of Antichrist. Now you got some dispensationalists that are pre-wrath, post-wrath, mid-wrath, whatever. From what I understand, historic premillennialists don't believe in a rapture either. So this might be a particular dispensational thing that historic premillennialists believe Christ returns, the Christians are raised and descend with Christ to reign for the 1,000 years. And then at the end of the 1,000 years, that's when the general resurrection happens for the final judgment. So the rest of them kind of raise up.
So how many resurrect?
Well, so both historic premillennialism and dispensationalism have two resurrections ultimately. They differ on timing. The rapture idea, though, is, I think, very particular to dispensationalism, where you think Left Behind, all the people leave, and like there's just clothes left behind, basically, and all the people there are left behind to suffer in the world. And so I think the reason why I kind of wanted to do this is because obviously right now there's tons of stuff out there, tons of arguments going on our side about they don't know it to be this way, but it is this way, between covenantal theology, which we talked about that a few episodes ago, of what do you do with Israel, right? That there's one people of God, all those that have faith in the Messiah. Jesus is the true Israel, and we're grafted into him, whoever believes. And so covenant theology and dispensationalism, but then also with that touches eschatology of your view of the end times. And for the dispensational, like the rapture is the thing that kind of kicks off the end times. That's the thing that kind of starts that 7-year tribulation where the Antichrist comes to power and all that stuff. And so I've seen a lot of people, it's dispensationalists in particular, basically saying if you don't believe in the dispensationalist view of eschatology, you're not a Christian and you don't believe the Bible and you don't believe in God's promises and all that stuff. So one of the things I thought would be helpful, and especially because it's so culturally ingrained. I mean, I grew up terrified of being left behind, like literally terrified of being left behind, that I would be, like my whole family would be raptured and I'd have to figure out as a kid how to live in an Antichrist world and stuff. And I wanted to kind of talk about the rapture specifically because it's kind of like, for me, the domino that can start getting some of it to fall, that if I can show people biblically about the rapture, like what it is or what it isn't, then it kind of opens up, well, if the rapture's not there, so what is my eschatology? Because it all hinges on this idea of this rapture, basically.
Before you get rolling here, does that mean you're not scared of the three numbers together?
No, I think the number it's not three numbers. So that's another misconception. It's not three numbers together. The mark of the beast, the number of the beast is not 666. The number of the beast is 666, which I believe refers to Nero Caesar, because if you do what Jews would call Gematia, I might be pronouncing that wrong, but it's basically like a math game where you assign letters to numbers, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 30, 40, that you assign numbers to letters, and it's like a riddle game. A riddle game of, like there's some archaeological dig that says, I love her whose number is 546 or something. Mm-hmm. So your name has a number, essentially.
So the churches would know to whom John is speaking.
Well, John says specifically about that. He says, it takes wisdom but his number is 666. So I think John is implying you can figure out who this is. To which I would say it's Nero Caesar, Nero, basically. And it's the Hebrew. If you apply it to the Hebrew letters and you do that little game, you get Nero Caesar, which is how it would have been written. And now people go, well, Revelation wasn't written in Hebrew; it was written in Greek. To which I would say, yeah. And John is also in exile on Patmos under Caesar. All of his letters are being read. You really think he's going to write out, yeah, Nero Caesar is this beast I'm writing about, and Christ is ultimately going to crush him and destroy him?
Yeah.
Because then he's immediately executed. So I think he's doing a layer of, that's why he says it takes wisdom. Because he says with the beast that it has, well, first of all, he says that the beast is, the seven heads are, the seven heads are seven kings. 5 were, 1 is, 1 will be, but only for a short while. So John is clearly saying 1 is. That means one of the kings of the beast has to be alive in his day to be is, or else what is he talking about? Mm-hmm. And so the beast, I think, is the Roman Empire, because what? It's a sea beast. Well, the sea is symbolic of the Gentiles, because the other side, you have the land beast. Well, what's the land? If I tell you the promised land, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. So that would be the false temple Judaism post-Christ, right? I think that's the land beast that looks like a lamb. Why? Because sacrifices and all that stuff going on. I mean, I love eschatology. I could talk about it all day. That's not really about the rapture. But yep. 1 is, and I think it's Nero Caesar. I think his number is allegiance, because it's on the mark of the beast is on your head and on your hand. And so I think that's what's so funny, dude. People go, oh, look, it's microchips. It's AI. It's all this stuff that you're going to have some kind of tattoo or some kind of thing that you just like swipe and look, it's all the technology is there. To which, like, that's not how you interpret the Bible. How would the original audience have understood these things? And when you understand that Revelation was written in the context of Old Testament apocalypse, Old Testament fulfillment, all this stuff. When I say head and hand, what does that make you think of? It should make you think of Deuteronomy 6, that you'll write this, you'll put it as a frontlet between your eyes and write it on your hands, talking about God's word. Yep. Symbolizing what? Your head symbolizing all that I am belongs to God. Your hand symbolizing what? All that I do belongs to God and is for him. So the mark of the beast, Nero Caesar, the mark on the head, the mark on the hand, if that is all I do is for the Roman Empire, all I am is for the Roman Empire.
My allegiance is to the Roman Empire.
Yeah. And you say, well, why would the Jews ever say that? The Jews hated Rome. Well, they also said we have no king but Caesar. Crucify him. And so another really interesting thing, this is like because the mark of the beast is about buying and selling. The other use of buying and selling is in the Gospels with the temple, whenever they're buying and selling in the temple, on the temple grounds. So there's some argument there for preventing from buying and selling, meaning like prevented from temple worship if you don't take the mark of the beast, if you don't take Christ, or if you take Christ.
That's interesting.
And so the idea would be that the temple worship was basically essentially worship to Rome, because, and people say, well, how is temple worship to Rome? God prescribed it. Well, post-Christ, what is the temple worshiping? Post-Christ, the temple is saying we have no king but Caesar. Post-Christ and his sacrifice, the temple is nothing. And so I actually think like the idol in Revelation is where they give life to it. It breathes fire. It speaks. I think that the idol in Revelation is actually the temple, where they're continuing this dead thing because Christ has already come. Christ has already put an end to the sacrifices, and that the fire, the burnt offerings on the altar, that they give life to it, they give breath to it. They keep doing the temple, even though it's obsolete at that point, post Christ dying on the cross.
It's false worship, yeah.
And that this idol is a symbol to the beast, right? And the land beast makes all the people worship it. Well, that is, we have no king but Caesar. So that's like the whole thing. So no, I don't think, so the mark of the beast, I don't think is some future deal. I do think the principle of the application, because, Revelation, what does it mean for us? I think the principle of the application is Christ is king. We serve him. We don't give in to beasts. We don't give in to tyrants. Rome was not the only beast that ever exists. In Daniel, you had 4 other beasts, right? Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and eventually Rome. And so I think there's a lot there. But eschatology-wise, to answer your question, on the total divergence of the rapture, no. And so
you're welcome for that.
You're welcome. So the rapture, though, is kind of the linchpin. And when all these people talk about the rapture and believing the rapture is near and all this stuff, which is also funny because like dispensationalists, you might have heard that we're in the Laodicean age of the church. Mm-hmm. We're in the Laodicean age, which, like, if you're in the Laodicean age, there's that means, because what they'll say, well, Christ's return was always imminent. It could have always happened at any point, any time, any day, right? But the fact of the matter is, when you put the church age thing in there, when you say like we're in the Laodicean age of the church, the church of Laodicea, that was the last church written, which is why they are saying that. So if you're going to take the churches in Revelation, the 7 churches, not as physical, literal churches back then in the first century, but as ages of the church, then Jesus' return was not always imminent, because you would have had 6 other ages before that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what they advocate for isn't even there. But when you ask these people, so basically the idea would be, what does the Bible say? That's always what we go back to. What does the Bible say? We're sola scriptura, people of the book. If you ask these people, what are the verses you have that says a rapture, that there's going to be a rapture of the church, that the church is going to disappear? There's 2 main passages that they always go to, and that's what I want to look at. We'll look at their 2 passages, and I want to look at a passage I have that would say that's not really what you think it is. So the 2 main passages they use are obviously 1 Thessalonians 4, and Matthew 24.
In the Olivet Discourse.
Matthew 24 in the Olivet Discourse.
Yeah.
So 1 Thessalonians 4, we're going to look at it, talking about we'll be caught up with him in the air, transformed in the twinkling of an eye. And in Matthew 24, 1 taken, 1 left. Those ideas. So I want to look at those 2 passages.
As in the days of Noah.
As in the days of Noah. So like I want to look at those 2 passages and say, okay, what is actually happening here? Is this talking about some kind of rapture or disappearing of the church before this 7-year tribulation? Which I think the tribulation, just to get it all on the table, I think the tribulation, Jesus says the great tribulation, right? He calls it that in Matthew 24. Matthew 24 is also where he's talking about the destruction of the temple. That's 24 verse 3. And then 24 verse 36, Jesus says, truly, true, I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all these things take place. So I take the great tribulation to be part of this generation. This generation will not pass away till all these things take place. And it's also interesting to know.
To the generation he was speaking to.
To the generation he's speaking to. Because what's he saying? You will see, right? He's telling them to watch out. And so I think he's talking to them, that generation. And so that the Great Tribulation, the abomination of desolation, which Luke interprets as when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, which actually happened when Rome came and surrounded by armies, and then Rome retreated for a reason no one really knows why, and then they came back, and that's when they ultimately laid siege on Jerusalem. So the Christians got out after Jerusalem was surrounded by armies at a certain point.
In AD 70.
Yeah, that's the abomination of desolation. Okay. Well, the surrounded by armies happened before that, I think. But the Jewish War, 66, 67, and on. But the interesting thing is this great tribulation that people talk about, this 7-year period in the future, is I put it like this. John is the only other book of the Bible that uses the word great tribulation, uses the phrase great tribulation. And Jesus says in Matthew 24, the great tribulation like has never been or never will be again. And he says this generation will not pass away till all these things take place. So if John is writing about the great tribulation, it would seem odd for him to take something that Jesus says was never going to happen again, never happened before, and to then, which Jesus clearly defined happening in that first century generation, to then writing Revelation, which if it's supposedly about thousands and thousands of years into the future, to take that same phrase, great tribulation, and say and apply it to that.
To apply it to the future.
That wouldn't make sense for him, a disciple, to do that. And also it's interesting that John says that he's a fellow participant. This is Revelation 1, a fellow participant in the tribulation. So what tribulation is he talking about? And he tells the church, I think it's Philadelphia, that Christ promises that if they stay faithful, he will keep them from the tribulation that's about to come on the whole world, the whole oikumene, the whole Roman Empire is what I would take that to be. If Christ was promising a church, I will protect you from the tribulation that is about to come, which is what Revelation is all about, that seems pretty cruel to say that to a church that was actually suffering if Jesus was really just talking about some people in thousands of years into the future. Seems like false hope to me. So that's
I mean, you have to ask, I think you have to ask the question of how would they find comfort in that?
Yeah. And so I think the tribulation, the great tribulation was, I think Revelation, that's one of the reasons I think Revelation was written about the destruction of Jerusalem, the passing of the old covenant age, and the blossoming of the new covenant on its own. But anyway, so in 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul says this. He says, but we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, those that died, is basically what he said, Christians that had died, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. And so right there, this is not, this is why I don't think this is the rapture. Because Paul is saying that those who have fallen asleep, so those who are in paradise today, like Jesus told the thief on the cross, today will be with me in paradise, that Jesus will bring those people with him. The rapture is us leaving here to go to them in paradise and to wait until in their view, the millennial reign, right? Yep. So I don't think it's the rapture Paul's talking about here based on their own system, because in the rapture, Christ does not bring with him those that are already asleep. He takes us from here to them for the 7-year tribulation to pass up. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so he says, for this we declare to you by word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command and the voice of an archangel and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. So this would be what I would say would be the resurrection. Because in the dispensational system, here again, the rapture is not the graves being emptied and the dead in Christ, those that are asleep, getting their resurrected bodies to go back. So you can't just like, we'll say, well, this is actually the rapture, and Christ does bring those that have fallen asleep, and they get their resurrected bodies, and then they go back to heaven to wait for the 7-year tribulation. That you can't say that, because Christ is clearly saying that the dead in Christ will rise first, that their physical bodies will come out of the grave. No one ever talks about that with the rapture. The rapture is just a vanishing of the church. Yes. It's not a resurrection at all of any sense in those from the grave. So 1 Thessalonians 4, I would say, is not referring to any kind of rapture, but actually to the resurrection that happens at Christ's return, which we're going to see in John 6 on the last day before the final judgment, right? The last day of human history before the eternal state. So 1 Thessalonians 4 talks about being caught up in the air, but it's not talking about we will always be with the Lord. Where? In the eternal state. That it's going to be, that those who are asleep are not going to miss it. That they have not missed out what Jesus has promised us, yeah. Right? And the resurrection is going to happen. So I think 1 Thessalonians 4 is clearly talking about the resurrection. Then you go to Matthew 24, which we've already kind of talked about and given some of the context of a little bit. But this is really the big verse that they will use to say this is the rapture. Here's what he says. He says, let me find the spot. There's 24. Okay. So he says, truly, truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So this is verse 34, not 36, like I said earlier. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And then verse 36, but concerning the day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. So Jesus is saying clearly, this generation, so you got to read it in context. Like there's a subheading there that makes people stop, and they don't realize there weren't subheadings in the original Greek. Yep. Jesus says, truly, truly, this generation will not pass away. So Jesus gives this general period of 40 years. But what he tells his disciples, but I can't tell you exactly what day that's going to be. I can't tell you exactly what hour that's going to be, because in his humanity, Christ is prophesying as a mediator, right? And he's saying, I can't tell you when it is. So Jesus is saying, it's going to be in the next 40 years, but I can't tell you when it's going to be exactly. No one knows but the Father. And he says, for as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Now, this is broader than what we want to do, but the coming of the Son of Man, people hear that and they think the Son of Man, because Jesus is in heaven, reigning at the right hand of the Father right now, coming to earth, right? So this is why they obviously think this is what Jesus is talking about. But the coming of the Son of Man is a quote from Daniel 7, where the Son of Man comes on the clouds, Daniel says, which Jesus referenced earlier in Matthew 24, up to, that's literally how you could translate the Hebrew, up to the Ancient of Days to receive power and glory and dominion. Basically, to sit on the throne at the right hand of the Father, Psalm 110, which Peter says was fulfilled at the resurrection and ascension of Christ. Psalm 2, today you're my son, today I've begotten you. Ask of me and I'll give you the nations as your inheritance. So the coming of the Son of Man is not necessarily Christ coming to earth. The coming of the Son of Man is Christ's enthronement and Christ's exaltation as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, according to the prophet Daniel.
Coming to the throne.
Coming to the coming of the Son of Man into his kingdom, into the kingdom that he has purchased by his death, burial, resurrection. So he says, for as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. So basically life was normal. life was going on as normal. No one saw it coming, is the idea. Because what Jesus is saying, this generation will pass away. I don't know the day or the hour. It's going to look like life is going on as normal, but it's going to be judgment, is what he's promising. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. So coming in judgment on Jerusalem is what I would take it to be. Then 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken, one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken, one left. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. So the question is obviously this. Jesus clearly couches this in the days of Noah. This one being taken, one left. One being swept away, and
Yes.
one left.
So my question for you is, who was taken in the days of Noah and who was left?
That's the question, because that's the context Jesus. So what is this taken? Because the dispensationalist reads this and says, well, this taken is taken to glory and happiness and blessedness.
Raptured.
But in the days of Noah, the one taken was swept away, taken in judgment, in death, in drowning. And the one left, Noah and his family, they were the ones that God saved. And so what I would say would be that Jesus is promising this judgment, and he's saying those that do not believe are going to be swept away in this judgment that's coming on the people that rejected him, the people that crucified him. Because he's saying, this generation, you will see these things. This is proclaiming as prophet judgment on that first century Jewish people that rejected Christ and said, crucify him, we have no king but Caesar. And so this is not actually talking about a rapture at all, because the ones taken away are not raptured. The ones taken away are swept away in judgment. The ones left are the Christians that listen to Jesus' words and that get out of Dodge whenever they see the abomination of desolation, whenever they see what Luke calls Jerusalem surrounded by armies. The Christians, historically, they all flee to Petra, and they all flee to other towns. They get out of Jerusalem, and they are safe from the judgment that comes and destroys the people that did not believe in what Jesus said. They did not heed Jesus' words. And the temple is destroyed, just like Jesus said it was, because the whole context of Matthew 24 is the disciples looking around at the temple, and it says, verse 1, Jesus left the temple, was going away. When his disciples came to the point out to him the buildings of the temple, they're looking at this, but he said, you see all these, do you not? Truly, I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So Jesus is prophesying here, and as he sat on the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be? What things? Well, he just said, not one stone left upon another, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? They obviously understood that the temple destruction was the end of something, the end of this old covenant era. And what's the sign of your kingdom, essentially? Anyway, that's like what... So the 2 passages that dispensationalists have for a rapture, I don't think, if you actually read them in context, don't actually teach a rapture. And really kind of the hinge of it is... One of the hinges of it, and this is like the last thing that we'll do, is think of it like this. And this kind of goes against dispensationalism and premillennialism, right? Because both those systems believe that Jesus at some point returns for a 1,000-year reign on earth, a literal 1,000-year reign on earth, which amillennialists and postmillennialists, we believe Jesus is reigning now. He's on the throne now. That God has already given him the throne of his father David, and he has all authority in heaven and on earth. That their whole system is predicated on this idea of Revelation 20, a first resurrection and a second resurrection. And there's problems with that anyway, where a principle of hermeneutics is you don't build a doctrine off a really complicated passage of Scripture. And Revelation is a really complicated book, and Revelation 20 is a really complicated passage. So you interpret the more complicated passages in light of the more clear passages. That's what hermeneutics says. And so they build a whole theology off of a really difficult passage in the first place. But they essentially say that Christ returns, the believers are resurrected from the grave with their new resurrected bodies. There's a 1,000-year gap of Jesus' millennial reign. And then there's what's called the general resurrection, where the unbelievers are raised for the day of judgment. And then it's a day of judgment in the eternal state. So essentially you have 2 resurrections separated. You have 2 resurrections on 2 different days separated by 1,000 years. Okay, so that's their system. So the problem with that is Jesus says this in John 5, who's also the same guy that wrote Revelation 20, by the way, John 5, 25 and following. So he says, truly, truly, I say to you, An hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. So Jesus very clearly says, is now here. What is that? That is the gospel preaching, that we are dead in our trespasses and sins, that we are raised together with Christ. This is what I think is the first resurrection that John is talking about. Because Paul says we reign with him, right? We are a kingdom of priests, is what Peter says, that we are a royal priesthood, essentially. And so Jesus is talking about the first resurrection is a spiritual resurrection. It's a spiritual resurrection from death to life. Every Christian that believes in Jesus Christ has been raised from the dead, right? For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man. And then Jesus says this, do not marvel at this. So basically, don't marvel at the fact that I'm telling you that the dead are coming to life right now. That right now, the dead are coming to life through my preaching, and I'm giving life because I have life in myself, right? Just because I'm God, is what he says. Do not marvel at this. For an hour, this is it. For an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment.
So 1 hour.
So there's several things here. So number one, do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming. So one specific hour, a specific point in time, and it's a specific point in time for both the resurrection of the just and the evil, the resurrection of life and the resurrection of those and the resurrection of judgment. Okay, so it's an hour for both resurrections, an appointed time. And notice Jesus also does not say, and now is here. He said earlier, I tell you the truth, the time is coming and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God and the dead will live. He doesn't say and now is, so this is sometime in the future. And he says, all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out. Every single one, every single person, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment. So what I take this to mean, if you interpret the less clear passage of Revelation 20 in light of the more clear passage, John 5, same author, by the way, same exact author. So I think there's connection here. There's one general resurrection. There's one general resurrection of both the just and the unjust. The resurrection of life and the resurrection of judgment happens in an hour because all in the tombs hear his voice, which remember that 1 Thessalonians 4 passage, Christ will cry out with a loud voice like that of an archangel. So I think that's what Thessalonians 4 is talking about. And that's where it's connected here. And we are told the next chapter in John 6 when this will happen, where Jesus says several times, I'll read one, for I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day. For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. So Jesus clearly says the resurrection of his people, the ones he's raising to the resurrection of life, will happen on the last day. The last day of what? The last day of human history. The last day of everything. So Jesus is not saying that the resurrection of believers happens and then you have 1,000 more years of human history and then another resurrection. That's not the last day then.
Yep.
Very clearly, this resurrection, which again, from John 5, is a general resurrection of all men. And Jesus clearly says this general resurrection happens on the last day. And I would take that the last day before the eternal state. It's like the day of final judgment, right? That very clearly, I think, if you read the Bible and you read it all in context, the Bible does not teach a premillennial understanding of eschatology. It does not teach a future millennial reign of Christ, of a resurrection of believers separated by 1,000 years from a resurrection of unbelievers and then the day of judgment. That the resurrection is one general resurrection for the day of judgment on the last day, and that the millennial kingdom is now. The millennial kingdom began when Christ ascended to heaven. It was manifested in power when Christ destroyed the temple under the God. You say, well, Christ didn't destroy the temple. Romans destroyed the temple. Remember when God sent the Babylonians? God said that I've sent them. They were his army to bring judgment on his people. Yeah. Well, it's the same way. Christ sent the Roman army as judgment on the people that rejected him, almost as a manifestation of, if I would do this, if I'm going to judge my own people that rejected me, what will I do to every other nation? What will I do to every other nation that does not kiss the Son, lest it be angry and you perish in the way? That's Psalm 2, which again, Peter says was fulfilled at the resurrection and ascension of Christ.
Yeah. So let me ask you this in light of this, addressing that there's no rapture in Scripture.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And this, obviously, the Scripture you just read about the resurrection. How would, as we start to close up here, how would you hope this would impact Christians in the way they live now?
Well, the extreme examples that you always hear about are where's waiting for the lifeboats. Like you're waiting for the last chopper out of Nam. Like,
where's you getting out of here?
Yeah, you assume that the world is going to get worse and worse. Which again, that's from Second Timothy, where Paul says, like, in the last days things will get worse and worse. People will be given over to these things. And so people go, well, look, that's a prophecy about the end times. Except because it says the last days very clearly, which I would say, well, Paul, I think, is referring there to the last days of the Old Covenant, because he tells Timothy, avoid them. So all these people that he's talking about coming in the last days, he's telling Timothy, avoid them, have nothing to do with them. Like, be on guard against them.
Yeah.
So they're obviously alive in Timothy's own day.
Yeah.
And so it's like, because you can also take the last days. You can take the last days as some people do this, and I'm sympathetic towards it, where the last days is the whole Messianic age, the whole Messianic New Covenant church age, because this is the last arc of redemptive history. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That there's no aspect of redemptive history left, because Christ has come, like the old covenant's put away. The next thing to happen is basically the discipling of the nations in the day of judgment, right? So that technically we are in the last days of world history, because there's, in terms of redemptive historical history of the world. So I would say, like, that Christians, I think, in the past have not seen, we're actually supposed to be discipling the nations. And I think, I want to be fair to premillennial brothers. I think premillennialists are some of the most ardent missionary senders in the world. I mean, they just are, because they believe that this idea that every tribe, tongue, and nation, which I do too, every tribe, tongue, and nation is going to worship the Lord. And so they have this idea that if we just reach the last tribe, then that's when Christ returns. And so Christ won't return until we reach the last tribe, right? And the issue with that is, what I would say, and I'd say this to my amillennialist brothers too, is, well, what does disciple the nations mean? Because I don't think disciple the nations means, okay, you take the gospel out to the whole world, and that last tribe of that last nation, it's 2 guys in a hut, and then Christ comes back.
Yeah.
That the 2 guys in the hut is discipling of the nations. I think it means disciple the nations. I think
the whole earth.
I think the whole earth is going to worship Christ. Not every individual person, but I believe the Great Commission is going to be fulfilled, because Jesus said,
it's the wheat field and the tares.
Yeah, and that the wheat field is not the church like the Presbyterians say. The wheat field is the world. Jesus very clearly defines it as the world. And so I think that the nations will come to worship Christ. They'll believe in him. Not every individual person. That's not what I believe at all. But I believe the Great Commission will be fulfilled, that the knowledge of the glory of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea.
That the leaven will leaven the whole lump.
The leaven will leaven the whole lump. The mustard seed will grow to be the greatest tree in the whole garden. I mean, I've talked about that before, that if the garden is the world, then all the plants in the world, all the plants in that garden are kingdoms of the world. Well, Christ's kingdom is greater than over all of them, overshadows all of them. Yeah. And I believe that's what's going to happen. That Isaiah 2, the prophecy that in the latter days, which if you take to be the last days as the whole church age, because the redemptive historical thing we're talking about, that the nations will say, come, let us go to the mountain of the house of the Lord. What's the house of the Lord in the new covenant? It's the church. Let us go to the mountain. That's his kingdom. Let us go and learn his law. That the nations want to learn his law. Listen, you don't want God's law unless you have a new regenerated heart.
Yeah.
And so that to me is the nation saying they're born again. They want to follow what God says. And then that's where the prophecy is. They will beat their swords into plowshares, and basically there will be world peace. I just don't think there's going to be, you can't have world peace without the gospel. Like, how do you get swords in the plowshares? How do you get disarmament? How do you get no more nuclear weapons? I think the only way is for all the nations to worship Christ and say, we're not going to live like that.
Yeah.
That we all serve Jesus, different ways, different governments, different nations, different cultures, every tribe, tongue, and nation. And so I would say, like, the way this practically kind of affects a Christian's life is it changes your perspective. Oh, we're not about to get the last boat of Nam out of here, the last chopper out of Nam out of here. So what are we supposed to be doing? Which it reemphasizes the Great Commission.
Yeah, what is the work?
And actually discipling the nations.
Yeah, and being hopeful in the work that the Lord is doing.
Salt and being salt and light, leaven, and praying actually, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, We pray this discussion on the rapture has been a blessing to you. And until next time, this is Everyday Discipleship.